seen this space so full, right? It's like been a few events.
I think we're live.
You think we're live?
Are you not on your phone? Are you? Check your account.
Am I on my phone?
On your phone, go look and make sure that you're on.
That I'm on where?
On Dr. Zhana, you're
Oh, on
live.
Facebook, on
Yeah.
Facebook. Okay, all right, we're checking.
Oh, you are live. I don't see any viewer.
That's okay. They'll come. They'll
Maybe
come.
a second and delay.
Okay. Yep. We're live. Cool? Yes? Yay! Woohoo!
All right.
I'm so excited that this is finally happening. So, hi everybody, and welcome to the Hacienda Villa. How many of you have never been here before? It's your first time. Oh my God, so many first timers. That's awesome, including some of our panelists. That's great. We love newbies. So the Hacienda Villa is a sex-positive intentional community that is a co-living space. So there are 14 people who live here, and there's also this event space that they open up for events of different kinds. So thank you so much for Hacienda for providing the space for this to happen. It is. I can hear myself. It is my absolute pleasure. I've never done anything like this. So I do a lot of events here, but nothing ever quite like this. So I'm super excited to do this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Zhana. I'm a professor of human sexuality at New York University, and I am a sex researcher, a writer, a podcaster, and I do a lot of different things that have to do with sexuality. And I'm super passionate about bringing kind of accurate scientific information about sexuality to the general media, and not just through academic teaching. And so I do a lot of different things, including these live events, which usually take the form of me summarizing a topic or the research that we have, the scientific research that we have on that topic, whatever that may be, and kind of having a discussion around that. But this month, and I do those every month, once a month, except when I travel in the summer. But this month, I got really inspired to do something different because, because of those awful FOSTA-SESTA laws that were passed by Congress and then signed into law by Trump, and also by the fact that I learned about Suraj's campaign through a mutual friend that apparently we have. For those of you who don't know, so we have primaries coming up in New York State. The Democratic primaries are on June 26th, and there has been someone who's been representing this district, New York 12th district, for about 25 years, right? Yeah, she almost always runs unopposed because, of course, it's a Democratic district. Of course, the Democrat's going to win, so the primaries is all that matters. And this is a rare case or a rare occasion where someone is challenging her. And one of the things that Suraj has been talking about, has been vocal about, is going against these laws, and kind of learning about that. And the laws themselves, I was like, we have to do this. We have to kind of bring Suraj here if he's willing to talk to us and kind of talk about some of these issues and raise awareness. And then, obviously, I thought, well, we should have some other voices to represent some of these issues that have more direct experience with sex work and sex trafficking and all that. So we ended up being super fortunate to get Stoya, who's many of you may know as a pornographer and also a voice out there for various issues on topics related to sexuality. And we have Kayen Darasho, who is a sort of a trans woman worker, activist and writer, and representative of Glitz, and founder of Glitz. Yes, and I'll let all of you introduce yourselves. And then we have Melissa Bruto, who's a attorney who's been working with sex trafficking and sex workers' rights and victims and all that. So I thought this was a really interesting combo of people with very different voices that can bring different kinds of things to the conversation. So here we are. I'm super excited to have this. So what I was thinking of doing is, and I usually talk a lot, but this time I'm not going to talk a lot. This is the longest probably that I'm going to talk. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and then I have some questions both from me and from some of you who had written and asked some questions of the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. So I'm just gonna let all of you kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and what your relationship with or involvement in sex work or sex trafficking and the fight sort of for those rights and yeah.
You want to start?
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Suraj.
I'm Suraj Patel. I'm running for Congress in New York's 12th Congressional District, which is the entire east side of Manhattan, from the Upper East Side to the Lower East Side, all of Midtown to 8th Avenue, and then across the river, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Long Island City, and Astoria. It's one of the most diverse, dynamic, aspirational districts in America. And as you mentioned, it has been represented for the last 25 years by one person who virtually runs unopposed. Now, the reason I'm running is part and parcel of why we're here today. You see, after Donald Trump's election, I worked for both Obama campaigns. I worked for the White House. I teach business ethics at NYU, and I'm a lawyer. But after Donald Trump's election, a lot of us find ourselves saying, what can we do more? It's time for us to take the reins. That Donald Trump is a symptom of a long-term problem in our politics that didn't just crop up overnight, but that Democrats, when they had power, and Republicans all the time, have failed to address the long-term problems in this country. We fail to talk about the future, and we fail to lead. And if we're not going to lead from places like this, from New York City, from the most progressive, the most educated district in America, then how can we expect anyone else to? This issue came to us the old-fashioned way. We were just listening. We started a campaign premised on no preconceived notions about who votes, why they vote. Instead, we said, if we start a campaign focused on listening to people and meeting voters and meeting New Yorkers and hearing about their issues, that we could put together a platform that actually represents the hopes and dreams and aspirations of this city. We were inundated with messages from people saying, what's your position on SESTA, FOSTA? And we honestly had no idea what it was. Day one, we didn't. And we sort of just let it go. And then we all of a sudden realized, look, this is a real issue affecting a lot of people in our district. And so I asked my policy director to look into it. And hats off to him for being just the most tremendous policy director I've seen in this business. He spent the better part of months, interviewing sex workers, anti-trafficking groups, prosecutors groups, things like that. And we really went through iteration after iteration of white papers to really get this issue right, because there's an inherent political risk in it. But at the end of the day, we realized that if we're not going to be the ones standing up for the most marginalized among us in New York City as Democrats, how are we ever going to expect anyone else to? And so we decided to take a bold stand on this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stoya. I'm a pornographer. Mostly I'm here because so few sex workers can take the risk of putting their faces at an event like this. And that's because of the stigma, because of... Cayenne can speak more about the dangers of facial recognition at this point. And by virtue of being a pornographer, my face is out there, and I can say, hey, I'm doing this thing, you should come listen. So I'm going to be doing a lot of listening. I hope you're doing a lot of listening. Let's listen to Miss Cayenne. She's really smart.
Hi, I'm Kyan Durshow. I'm positively trans. It's not some kind of trans. I'm positively trans.
Oh, sorry.
Positively black. Positively the founder of Glitz. I'm on 5 boards, including Mel's, from around the world, participating in trans affairs and the GLBT community. But my agency or my organization is about helping the marginalized community fight this fight. We are suffering because of these bills. I'm having tomorrow morning put somebody in rehab. I feel like I failed them. This law is failing them. It's failing many sex workers. We're facing homelessness along with many other problems that are connected to our community that we already deal with. Here goes laws that don't protect you. You were able to protect yourself before SESTA and FOSTA, and now we're monumentally screwed because we don't have the access. So with the help of all of us up here and the help of you, we're able to not only investigate but give back and find out how to help this community.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bruto. I've been an activist in the sex worker community for almost 20 years, and I'm an attorney. And I, a year ago, co-founded the SOAR Institute, also known as Sharmis Outlaw Advocacy and Rights Institute, named after a dear friend of ours that passed away. And we do policy and advocacy to advance the rights of sex workers and survivors of human trafficking. And before SOAR, I did direct client services for many, many years, along with my co-director, who is a social worker. And so we have sort of, each of us, 10 years of experience doing direct client work from a legal and therapeutic standpoint, people in the sex industry, definitely from a rights-based decriminalization, harm reduction framework. And so in terms of FOSTA and SESTA, this is a law that is decidedly not harm reduction. In fact, it's augmenting the harms to a very stigmatized and criminalized population. And so certainly been vocal against this legislation and the impact that it's had on people in the sex industry.
Thank you. Suraj, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone being kind of any candidate, anyone who's already an elected official, especially at that level, being vocal about sex work and or kind of in this way. Are there any other people out there?
Oh, it's going to be lonely in that Capitol Hill cafeteria. Yeah. I'm not sure that I know of anyone off the top of my head that is willing to take this stand. Now, that doesn't have to always be the case. You see, I think that politics has a herd mentality to it. I think we're really shining light on an issue that is creating a humanitarian crisis, and it is focused on punishment over prevention. If we're really concerned about human trafficking, then we should have been talking about labor trafficking. We should have been talking about exploitation of undocumented workers. We should have been talking about the root causes of exploitation and trafficking, which are, homelessness, LGBTQ discrimination, undocumented status, so many other things. And it's just curious to me. The way that I came to this issue is that I talk a lot about overall the mass incarceration problem in this country. That if the entire generation of Democrats and Republicans ahead of us have triangulated to be tough on crime instead of smart on crime, focus on punishment instead of prevention. And decades of that has led to a country that hosts 25% of the world's prison population, while being only 5% of the world's population. And if you are a hammer, everything you see is a nail. For these people, the one thing they can do is pat themselves on their backs when they create new types of crimes, longer sentences, more mandatory minimums, and throw the key away on so much human potential. It ends here. If we prove that we can begin to turn the tide by highlighting this kind of work and standing on principle, people will join. I'm telling you that, the risks inherent in doing this, I just think were overblown to taking the stand. I thought one we were considering it. People were like, "Oh, you're going to open yourself up." I'm like, it's so absurd on its face to think there's a politician running for office because he's pro-trafficking that only an idiot would do that, and we just call him out on it. And so really it was, it's tied into this problem. This country has for so many years really thrown away the key on so many people. And I'm just, one other point, which relates to this and incarceration in general. I was saying that, Chicago spends 40% of its general budget on policing. Baltimore spends 32% of its general budget on policing. It's not like we're not spending enough money in black and brown communities. We are, but we're doing it on the wrong things. We over-surveil, we over-police, we we put that group who tend to be poorer into a criminal justice system that's tied directly, whose outcomes are tied directly to how much money you have to pay. And then we have an over-incarceration problem in this country. 70% of the people that are in jail in this country are there because of a nonviolent marijuana possession offense or because they can't pay cash bail. They haven't been indicted of a crime yet. And so if you took that same amount of money and spent it on producing and creating economic opportunity in healthier communities, we'd move past this moment. But again, if we can't, we don't just need more Democrats, we need better Democrats. We need ones in places like this that lead on ideas like focusing on prevention and long-term solutions, not two-year Band-Aid solutions to ensure their re-elections and be tough on crime. We just can't have it here.
Just so that everybody is kind of on the same page about what these laws are and what we're really debating, Melissa, maybe you can speak about what they are and then why are they bad?
Sure.
I mean, we can all speak to that, but just kind of give us a little overview of what these laws are.
Sure. So FOSTA and SESTA are the same bill. There was some differences, but essentially the same. FOSTA was the House version, SESTA Senate version. They passed at the end of March. Donald Trump, can't bring myself to say President Trump, signed it into law on April 11th. And basically what this law does is it changes on a very fundamental level the way the internet is supposed to work. The internet, there's obviously websites that allow third-party content on them. And the Communications Decency Act has protected the websites from being held liable, whether civilly or criminally, for content that's posted, right? If I go on Facebook and say I'm gonna, punch, Cayenne, doesn't mean Facebook is, right, my, co-conspirator in that, right? So that, otherwise the internet would break, right, if every website was held responsible for the content that people were posting. Basically, what this new legislation does is it pokes a hole in that sort of that protection that websites have in relation to the sex industry. So basically, it creates and solidifies an exception whereby websites can be held liable both civilly and criminally for promotion of prostitution or sex trafficking. And that might sound great, right, to people that are not knowledgeable about how things work, right? Everyone, as Suraj said, everyone's against trafficking, right? That's generally a thing.
I don't think anybody here supports trafficking,
right?
Okay.
It's a grave, labor rights violation, but unfortunately, as happens again and again and again on this issue, especially once you say sex trafficking, which is a problematic label. It should be human trafficking, right? Regardless of the type of labor that is forced. But whenever you say that, people's brains stop working, right? Politicians' brains start working. Everybody's brains sort of stop working. And they think, oh, it's bad. And again, like Suraj said, hammer, right? How do we just stop it? How do we stop everything and end everything? And that's not how life works, right? We tried prohibition, that didn't work. Marijuana is criminalized, in many states, that also doesn't work. So same as here, if you say, well, now we're going to go and target and criminalize these websites, that's not going to stop prostitution, right? That's just not how life works and not how human behavior works. That's not how the sex industry works. If anything, you're going to make it more marginalized, drive it underground. So what has happened In between the passage in Congress and Trump signing it, Backpage was raided and shut down, right? And so a lot of people think, well, that was related to the new law. It was actually before the new law had passed, but it was, I mean, my opinion was sort of a warning shot, right? That the government sort of shot to let, you know, websites know they were serious. And so since end of March, early April, there's been dozens and dozens of websites that have either completely shut down or have shut down adult services sections or have begun to heavily screen and censor the users. And that, you know, can take a wide variety of things, either not allowing people to post at all or not allowing people to post with certain search terms. And the problem is that human trafficking is really complex. It's a really complex, nuanced labor violation that, you know, takes an expert to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, maybe many conversations, maybe, you know, over many months to see, is this person being trafficked? It's not something that a computer algorithm can detect based on terms that somebody's inputting or a picture of somebody's ad, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Unless you're doing like a TV movie about trafficking, that's not how it works. It's much more complex. So there's no way that this law, which is really very heavy-handed, can detect and stop trafficking. It's really, what it's going to do is make it that much harder, as Cayenne said, for people to work and for people to survive. They're going to have to go on more underground, shadier websites, which really screws the government over, right? If they're going to try to have a paper trail, if there is trafficking, they're not going to have it anymore. And it's going to have more people working in more dangerous situations. I don't know, hopefully that describes what it does.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, on one hand, it's not good for, well, because it's conflating trafficking and sex work,
Yes.
and it's making very, very difficult for consensual adult sex workers who are not being trafficked to do the work that they want to do in a somewhat safer way. But also, it's not good. It's not actually preventing sex trafficking or helping us fight sex trafficking.
Exactly, and quite the opposite, right?
Quite.
Really making it that much harder for above, you know, there are really not going to be above board cooperative websites that are going to be cooperating if there is a trafficking investigation and all of that, yeah.
I'll add that was a really big point for me as well, which is that Donald Trump's own Department of Justice was opposed to this bill from the standpoint of prosecution. It makes it, the evidentiary burden becomes that much bigger. You have no paper trail. They know that trafficking situations now go to the dark web or off the web altogether. So this is just a stupid, sloppily written bill by a bunch of people who wanted to. The one thing that, you know, every Congress, for whatever reason, you know, wants a couple bipartisan achievements to take back, and this it seems to be that sex is often targeted in these, you know, and our team falls right into the hands of the religious right every single time. So that's just one of the points. Is that the prosecution, a lot of prosecutors groups were opposed to this bill.
Right, but we should mention that a lot of Democrats voted for them.
Oh yeah,
right?
almost all Democrats.
All of them.
And to take it back to the negative effect that it's had on the consensual sex work community.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more from you too about that.
Immediately started hearing about pimps reaching out to workers as soon as FOSTA passed the Senate, which means jeopardizing their safety.
Not to mention that he got busted right before this soliciting sex work. He's not penalized. He's not in trouble. He nor his lawyers got in trouble. We are in trouble or looking at trouble. It started with his fight, and he's turned his fight into our fight now. It's a dangerous area we're walking in. I went out Thursday night with BuzzFeed, and I seen the pimps. The pimps tried to pick up the production girl, who is trans. And she had to call an aide to walk with her because they were trying to get her to work. So that's how very serious this is. The same neighborhood that did not want solicitation back, which is Chelsea, now has it again. and you have it in a force where there are so many cisgender men out there trying to get girls to work. How is this fair? How does this, when we had the power to take care of ourselves, we now have pimps coming back into the situation where girls are not okay. And we have no idea what they may be subjected to do if they're not making money.
Stan, can you actually talk a little more about how this is affecting people on the ground, and how the internet and not having all these sites being taken down was a way to protect people from it?
So immediately when the bill was signed, immediately my phone started blowing up. Not just in New York City, in the Bay Area, in Chicago. I went to a leadership meeting in Arkansas. We figured, along with Miss Major Griffin Gracie, who's an icon in this stuff, we figured having a leadership summit to find out what the South is going through. Now, mind you, here we're marginalized by money. Our whole lives exist because of money. But imagine the South where they have no money and are surviving off of sex work. So what the pimp demographic looked like in the South, way different from here, because these girls have nothing to fight. And we're saying $300 rent is a problem. My rent is 20-something hundred.
Right.
Imagine the normal single girl that can't afford $1,400-1,500 for a room. We're talking a room. How is she paying her rent? And if she has a partner who she's been supporting, and it's just a strange scenario, most trans women wind up taking care of their husbands because they're a piece of shit. But that's a whole nother topic. That's a whole nother topic. What's happened is immediately my phone started to ring. Do you know girls that need to work? My emails, my private emails started to get hit with questions about pimping. Hey, I'm this guy. I'm going to take care of her. If you just turn me on to somebody, this is an area we haven't dealt with. Like women, the feminist movement have given trans women power. The internet gave them power to protect themselves. A lot of the cases of murder of trans women have been street work. This is what you force this community back into, which is street work under all odds. So what are they not supposed to do? And if they go to jail, they get penalized and fined. How are they going to pay that fine? Is there a situation set up to pay a trans girl's fine who got locked up for soliciting because you took her tool to pay the bills and stay off the streets?
Is there anything to add?
I mean, that's the gist of the really serious stuff. And we are seeing, because of Twitter and Instagram's excessive reaction, my
Rapes.
assistant's right over. Well, yeah,
Rapes.
that. But even down to the level of overreach, where trying to spread the word about actions is hampered because certain hashtags get banned. So I'm like, assistant, put this up, and she has to go like, what's banned today that might get this post shoved in a corner by the algorithm so nobody hears about it, so nothing gets done.
Hashtags are getting banned?
Yeah.
Instagram at one point within the past 2 weeks had banned hashtag woman. Like, they got so far out of control.
Yeah.
It's somebody else has to have seen this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. Strippers.
Yeah, strippers and female strippers, but not male strippers.
Of course.
Which means, like, not only is there an actual body count because of FOSTA, it is that much harder for us to spread the word. And I'm also hearing reports from journalists of when they ask for sources, their accounts being shut down or hindered in some way.
And there's also been an increase, at least anecdotally, that I've noticed, although this definitely predated FOSTA, but I've seen an uptick, and I think we're going to continue, in terms of people having trouble with banks, PayPal, Venmo, right, financial institutions not wanting anything to do with somebody that may be possibly engaging in erotic labor of any sort, even legal forms of erotic labor. And
Even legal work?
even legal work.
Even advocacy.
A few years ago, a number of banks, including Chase, shut down a number of pornographers' bank accounts. People found out because they got a check for their balance in the mail. If you can't access online banking, checking a debit card, your entire life comes to a standstill. Did anyone in the room grow up poor? Okay, check cashing. How much of that check do they keep? Enough to keep you down, like to make digging yourself out financially almost impossible. So banking is a huge crowbar.
Anything else? I think it might be a good to get all of the different ways that this has been is affecting, or the different kind of angles that it's or from different angles that it's hitting sex workers.
Well, for
else?
trans women to have to become homeless now, they would need housing facilities. I'm having to outsource people from all around the world. Literally, either get them from their home to here where we're fighting this, to another place like Washington where there is housing for trans women specifically. And that comes by the public defender's office called me. They're not funding me, but they asked me to help relocate somebody. I'm not largely funded, but I've done this twice for the public defender's office. We're being criminalized and put in positions of dire straits, and there's no plan for this. There's no bigger thought for what they're doing to a marginalized community, but take us down. You figure sex work is bad, but it's okay to rape a sex worker, because as a raped sex worker, how are you going to explain that you were raped by a client? And I've just heard this, not from a trans woman, from a woman sex worker that was raped who had nowhere to turn. I have to help her. We have to help her as a community, because we can't turn to the law for this. It's horrible.
The law has literally said things like that's just theft of services.
Yeah.
Everything kind of saying there's a source to cite how horrifying it is.
So Suraj, go.
I just had one more impact to add, which is either increased sort of tech surveillance or the perception. Well, we not just perception, we know it's reality, right? With having woman being banned. But I guess I'm saying perceived in the sense that we don't know, because now it seems that there is this heightened sort of surveillance by websites of what people are posting, what hashtags, what words they're using, and now banks, right, about how people may or may not be getting their income, that I think that there is a very understandable fear within the community. Well, how far is that going? And where does it begin and where does it end, right? Are all of these websites being monitored that are still up? What sort of web trail is there or isn't there? Facial recognition. So I think it's opening up this bigger issue of sort of this big brother idea, which has always existed. This isn't because of SESTA, but I think it's making clear that the fear that I think that people in the sex industry have had, it's almost like it's being realized, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This fear of being monitored, of surveillance, of having various institutions knowing your business is actually occurring. And so that I think is sort of something that we've yet to see how far that has gone and will go. Not to sound alarmist.
We can look at like China for a really chilling example.
I do want to say Melissa did, and SOAR did a Know Your Rights, which was phenomenal. And there is such thing as facial recognition. It is happening, and it's happening as we speak. If you are in fear of them seeing your face, you can mask your face by big sunglasses, go buy them. Cover your mouth, because any one of those waves off, they can't recognize your face. This is terrible. So this is Big Brother all over again. What's next? Slavery? Women lose the right to vote? Women have no control of their bodies? Because all of that, we're looking at all of this happening all over again.
Whew. Not to sound alarmist at all, no. Not
Yeah,
scary
not
at
to
all.
dry
no.
y'all up and shit.
So Suraj, what are some alternatives? Let's say that there is some political will to repeal this and replace it with something better, repeal these laws and replace them with something better. What are some alternatives? What would you be, say, standing for, and what would your campaign kind of...
Yeah, I mean, so let's be realistic with the political realities here.
Mm-hmm.
This bill passed with a significant majorities in both houses, with Democrats following suit in both cases. But I think that we should be focused on harm reduction first and foremost. I think that pointing and shining a light on the humanitarian catastrophe that this has created, emergency rooms being, filled with people who have been abused by pimps, things, as this happens, we have to keep pointing to the point that, like, there's a harm reduction principle that we need to go towards. And it's not that out of bounds, because, look, the opioid crisis is making out of so many heretofore, tough on crime people a little more humanitarian about harm reduction first, right? Needle exchanges are happening, even voluntary injection sites are happening in cities across this country. And so this may be something that, if we continue to focus on harm reduction about it, and make sure that we say, look, moralizing about sex is way above our pay grade. But we can, in public policy, do our best to reduce the most harm and create the most prevention. And the alternative to trafficking, of course, all trafficking should be fought at the root cause of trafficking. But exploitation happens when you give people no recourse. If you are terrorizing immigrants, 11 million of them living in this country without documentation, such that they can't even call in domestic abuse cases, can't show up to courts as witnesses, even in Brooklyn. Eric Gonzalez, the DA, said that. Can't go to the hospital. If you're doing that, you're pushing people in exploitation situations. If you're putting people back out on the street simply to make a living, then you are putting people back in exploitation situations. But yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Of course, it's going to be difficult to get people to turn around and say we made a mistake on something like this. But I guess the other thing that I realized on our ride over here in Subway is that while this may be sort of a relatively small community that is directly affected by it, one, never underestimate the power of a single issue voter. Look at the NRA. And two, obviously for anyone involved in anyone that is in sex work, there are a lot of clients of sex work that need to be enlisted in this fight with you, right? That there are a lot of consumers of pornography, there are a lot of consumers of sex work. Mm-hmm. And you may not realize what agency you would have if we were to really make this, a big issue.
What is other thoughts about what are some political things that we could accomplish?
I mean, I think everything has to be baby steps, which is really frustrating, right? So frustrating. But I think in this issue around sex work and human trafficking, what I've seen is, over the last almost 20 years, is definitely a narrative shift in the mainstream media around sex work and depictions of the sex industry. And so I think that is critical, right? Sort of, it can sound really amorphous, this sort of narrative shifting, but ultimately that does impact policies. Again, it's a long term, nothing is quick and easy. The other, although on the flip side of that, because of the human trafficking movement, which I definitely am part of, But
fighting it, not
right,
supporting
I'm
it.
not part of for against. But the movement, the human trafficking movement is anti-human trafficking movement is split, right, with the harm reduction rights-based individuals and people that are prohibitionists, right, that want to shut the sex industry down. Nobody's calling for all nail salons or restaurants or farms to be shut down, but sure, or domestic work, yeah, no one should have a house, right? But sex work, yes. But I think, unfortunately, the dialogue around trafficking has actually pushed the sex worker movement backwards in many ways, right? It's almost the same dialogue and discourse we saw in the 80s and 90s around porn is all exploitation, women in a meat grinder, Gloria Steinem, et cetera, et cetera. But overall, I think that we are seeing the narrative shifting around sex work. And then I also think that there are policies that are way short of full decrim, which is what I think the end goal, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would, imagine many people in this room support full decriminalization of consensual adult sex work, all forms of sex work. But short of that, there are smaller policies that we can see being pushed forward. So for example, there's vacating convictions law, which New York was the first state to pass in 2010, allows survivors of trafficking to vacate or get rid of their former convictions. We've also seen we're trying to get rid of the loitering for the purpose of engaging in prostitution law in New York. Currently, there's a pending bill. So I bring that up to say that there.
What does that mean for those who don't?
Oh, so yeah. So every state has a different penal code around prostitution and loitering or solicitation. It's called something different, right, in every state. New York has loitering for the purpose of engaging in a prostitution offense on the books. It is basically a total bullshit law. It's basically a thought crime. It's like, you look like a prostitute, so we're going to arrest you, right? It's you basically have to be out in public, wearing certain things in a certain neighborhood, looking like you're trying to pick up a client. You haven't actually done it. You just look that way. And it's basically if you've waved to multiple cars or passersby, on the street. And of course, they're only policing certain neighborhoods, people of color, trans women, etc. So it's a terrible law. It's totally fucked up. And we're trying to get rid of that law. So again, I bring that up, and that's New York State. I bring that up just to say that there are baby steps in terms of policies, especially on the state level. Sorry, Suraj. that can be altered around criminal law, because criminal law is generally state by state. But there's also, I'm sure, things federally as well. But it's our end goal is decrim, but baby steps.
Suraj, are you in support of decriminalization?
I think on this, as you were saying, I'm going to follow the lead of the community when the community gets to a consensus on this. This is, much in the same way that we are listening and making our positions based on the people actually affected by this. Go figure. As a crazy policy idea. But that being said, again, for me, I think the best we can do from my perch would be to continue to focus on harm reduction and take this to the next step by shining a light on the catastrophe this law has caused.
Any other baby step policies on state or federal level that, I don't know, we could dream of sooner than full decrim?
Well, there's also the utilization of condoms as evidence, which probably many people are familiar with. But and I don't want to, I feel like my co-director will correct me if I get this incorrect, but we fell short of having a state law to alter that, but we did get, I believe, a city council resolution. I'm looking at Crystal, but...
Yeah, we have not gotten a state law. But it's not currently active, but that doesn't give really strong protection. They can still do it if they want to.
Yeah, so condoms, right, can still be utilized as evidence. It doesn't, so basically what that looks like is that police arrest somebody for either loitering or for prostitution or prostitution-related crime. And of course, when anybody is arrested, the police, search them, search their belongings. If there's condoms, lube, sexual debris, that's literally what is listed on an evidence sheet. I don't know what that means. But it can be utilized as evidence. if something were to go to trial, which very few cases actually go to trial, but it's just that notion, that's something that is a harm reduction, that's like the ultimate, right? Like a condom in a syringe. Like, can't think of, any two things that are more poignant in terms of harm reduction could be utilized against somebody, right? So the condom itself is not criminalized, but it can be utilized as evidence, and that still is happening in many, many, many states. There are some boroughs within New York are choosing, right, not to utilize that as evidence, but prosecutors still can.
Any other things to add on that from any of you? Okay. Are there some non-obvious allies in this process that we could turn
People like your stepmom. So, hear me out. One of the things that we've seen in pornography over the past decade is better but still slightly offensive headlines along the lines of porn stars have pets too, just like real people. But that has helped humanize us. So pointing people that you meet in day-to-day life who maybe aren't so lefty or aren't so active on the internet, who are less likely to run into the voices of sex workers speaking on their own experience and what they actually need, making those connections and making them gently. Like, starting with, hey, I saw this person speak about this. Instead of like, hey, mom, check out this hardcore BDSM porn. Like, you don't want to throw people off the deep end, but getting in there and helping people exercise empathy and see things from a perspective that might be totally foreign to them really does have results. Slowly, but it does.
And I was just sort of laughing when you asked that because I'm, of course, thinking of clients, sex work clients. And I think, what we see in this country is so much moral hypocrisy around sex and sexuality. I like what you said about it being sort of above the pay grade of politicians, but it's actually, I feel like so much legislation around sex and sexuality, gay marriage, all that is from a place of fear, right? Fear of being outed, a fear of acknowledging your own desires, right? And so, I don't know of a way to engage and harness the client contingent, but that is most people, right? I mean, who doesn't watch porn, right? I mean, everybody watches. I mean, there might be a few, monsters. Everyone watches porn, right? So, I think that if we can harness that in a way that is, almost everyone engages in some way in the sex industry. It's not taboo, it's not dirty, it's not shameful. Sex is something that's beautiful. How can we sort of flip that conversation to engage people and destigmatize? And I think that would change everything. But I guess that's sort of the ancient question, right?
I will say one thing, that in my young political career so far, I've learned one thing, which is that political power isn't given, it's earned. That one of the reasons that for decades it has been so easy to continually, incarcerate primarily black communities or, do nothing about the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in this country or whatever, is that they have the least agency in our politics, right? And so it's really easy to be tough on crime and then walk away and pat yourself on the back and have passed this bill about, crack dealers or whatever. They don't vote. But this is kind of a crisis for this community, and you ought to not waste a good crisis, because we always say on our campaign, we have t-shirts that say we are the equal and opposite reaction. I'm running for Congress. I wouldn't be sitting up here if Donald Trump wasn't elected 2 years ago. I wouldn't have stepped into the political arena, and if I didn't feel a calling to have to do so because no one else was doing it the right way in this district. And similarly, I think this is a really big clarion call. I think if you are able to, if this community is able to get some victories, political victories, get people elected that stand up for you, but also get referendums on ballots, get all those things to happen, Politics, like I said earlier, it's a herd mentality. People will rapidly flock and follow suit based upon you flexing those political muscles. So organizing.
What can sex workers do in this climate to sort of protect themselves from this?
Organize, be a part, communicate, we can't do this separately. There's so many organizations and survivors against SESTA and this group and that group, but no group wants to work together. We cannot do this. If we want to get sex workers to support this man, we need to have him in the room, them in the room, all in the room. We need to have not only the supporters, we need to have our clients, we need to have the priests, we need to have the people from the jails. They all need to be in these rooms. When I was locked up years ago, it was so funny that two of the officers said, I had to call her in the middle of the night. I was only there for 30 days. But in those 30 days, I had an officer who showed my picture to other inmates, which are pictures that were beautiful pictures. But now inmates literally want to get at me, which puts me in harm's way. But the officer said, I can't believe they arrested you for this. And you served time for this. December 17th, a group of us organized the Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. On December 18th, I was physically attacked in my house, beaten within every inch of my life, and I went to jail. It took my community to help pull me back together. I'm still not together. I can't ride the trains. I can't be in public. But I'm still doing this work. So it was my community that helped me, and SOAR, and Survivors Against SESTA too, helped me. We need to come together to help each other out of this fight. And if it means organizing, throwing parties, going to bars and getting the word out, maybe you stepping into a couple of LGBT bars. I know a lot of promoters.
Sure.
Get the children.
Also a good time to plug our town hall on
the 15th or 16th?
Saturday.
16th.
We are doing a sex worker town hall jointly on Saturday at. Look at that. Okay, great. Good, because I really don't know my own from 2 to 4:30. So please, make sure you put that in your calendars if you'd like to come and tell people.
I'm here as an organizer with Suraj's campaign and Glitz for the town hall next Saturday. So if people have questions, I'll be here afterwards.
Great. Awesome. Thanks. Okay, organize. How can non-sex workers help? What can
we could really
friends and allies help?
I'm a small organization. SOAR is a small organization. Survivors Against SESTA is a small organization. There are many organizations. I think the bigger picture is helping humanity. I'm tired of burying people. I'm tired of calling families to say another girl is murdered. I'm having to do that. I'm also tired of my community who has stayed away from drugs, have now found drugs again because of this law. The desperate do desperate things. So now I'm having to make calls and decisions on the behalf of people. I can barely make a decision for my freaking self. And I'm stepping up in areas where we need to be funded. We need the help. We need the college kids. We need it all. We need volunteers, definitely. We need letters to inmates that are in jail for sex work that could use some communication from the outside, because if you don't know what it feels like to go in and be alone, it's the worst. And then this time, something as simple as a letter means the world to somebody.
And actually, I believe we brought some cards for Swap Behind Bars that are over there, as well as flyers for SOAR. But Swap Behind Bars, you could probably speak more, but is an organization through the Sex Workers Outreach Project nationally. Cayenne's on the board, where there is letter writing and
Yeah.
book sending.
I'll cook
and-
dinner. Y'all come right to letter. I got a cookbook. You will eat. But it's just a way to give back. If we can find the funds to sustain supporting someone like Suraj Patel, supporting the work, supporting the people, supporting the lawyers that help, that advise sex workers how to just do it again, how to get out of the funk, how to get out of the red, how to make it. We need the help. We truly do.
So donate, right? Donate money, donate time, and volunteer.
And show up. Like
Yes.
if you can afford to put your face out there at a public action, at a march, that display of actual bodies who care enough to get out in the street is huge.
Court support too.
And so many people, if you're undocumented, you can't take the risk. If you have some, lots of reasons that people can't afford to be outed. And so people who can take that on, like, it's important to go ahead and do it.
They ran through Jackson Heights, locking up trans women that, with the sense of loitering, they may have just been leaving an area dominated by nightclubs. If I'm going to a nightclub, I'm half naked, I'm gonna let you know. But it may not be prostitution, but they're locked up and now sitting in ISIS because they were leaving. So all of these tactics are ruining us.
And I was also just going to say, and Caitlin, you had a question, but also if there are lawyers, therapists, other professionals, either in the room, watching, listening, that you know of, we could always use that support, because I know, for myself as an attorney, and I'll call up my co-director again, who is a therapist, Crystal sitting over there. We at SOAR, we're not a direct services organization. We both have that experience of doing direct services, but that's not what we're doing at SOAR. And so, we're both, called all the time for our direct client work. And so I'm always looking for, lawyers that are happy and willing to donate their time and expertise to do direct client work, especially in the wake of SESTA, and the same with sensitive therapists as well.
Politically, we can vote, right? And get out and vote.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just to bring it back here to, it's a positive thing. This is despondency is exactly what they want. Being able to have you throw up your hands and say, oh my God, what can we do? It's never going to change, creates a paralysis of action that these people want, right? To stop, halt, and retard progress, to halt change. And so I want to iterate that, as dark as it may seem, one of the things that I do think are really remarkable about politics is that it's not linear. That the difference between 49% and 51% is the difference between Donald Trump and Barack Obama. It is huge amounts of tipping points. Couple that with the simple fact that merely 26% of America voted for Donald Trump, and that 60% or that 40% of the country stayed home. Or in my election, on average, 6.8% of people vote in a Democratic primary. In all the neighborhoods I just named, 16,000 total votes on average are cast.
Wait, 7%.
Yeah, 7%. So we're looking
Vote
at
in the primaries, in the Democratic primaries
That's
of
right.
registered Democratic voters.
That's right. So we're looking at trying to get 11,000 people between the Upper East Side, Murray Hill, Kips Bay, Midtown East, Gramercy, East Village, Lower East Side, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Long Island City, Astoria, and Blissville. We need 11,000 people to show up and vote. So as simple, as crazy as that is, it is difficult to get people to motivate and mobilize to vote. But if you do, it's not, these aren't astronomical or crazy numbers. One of the reasons I'm running is because if we can change the underlying demographics of the electorate that shows up in November across the country by 5 points to be a little younger, a little more colorful, a little more diverse, if we can do that, that's the paradigm shift we need in this country to flip all kinds of seats, right? It's not just geographic. It is changing who votes. If you change who votes, you change the future. And And I think I leave you with that I think that as despondent as easy as it is to fall into despondency, that's exactly what they want. And therefore, find your agency. It's as simple as voting. It's as simple as telling people about voting. It's as simple as organizing. But find your agency, because that's a much more terrifying political force for the other side.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can't have a super progressive candidate here in this 12th district, which is never going to vote Republican, right? It's not like we're in danger of not electing the more moderate, the more electable candidate in the general election, right? So
we don't even have a Republican on the ballot in November.
There's no.
No, there's not. This is a phenomenal 5-month vacation for me if we win this thing on June 26th before I go and ruin my life. So.
Right. So yeah, like this is one of those